quite different. During the course, we had changed our mind. So it's about, the generation gap. And the big question that today we are going to discuss is what if generation gap could be minimized if can't be obliterated altogether? But before going into the details of what generation gap is, what are the social consequences of generation gap? What actually causes generation gap? And finally, how can we overcome it? How can we address this issue, which I believe is becoming a problem? Now, before going into the details of those questions, before answering those questions, I would like to ask a very simple question. Though I can't see you, at least on this side, I can see some people. How many of you are familiar with this term, generation gap? Please raise your hands. Oh, I can see very few people. Whatever, probably we haven't felt it that much as it is felt in some other fast-growing societies. What do we mean by generation gap? It's actually the difference between the attitudes, the tastes and behavioral choices across various age groups. Such a difference, such a gap between or among generations, keep this in mind, is overlapping. By that I mean that generation gap is actually a continuum. You can't draw a very clear line between a preceding and a succeeding generation. But still, we can feel this difference of generation gap along this continuum. Now, the question is, what are the consequences, social consequences of generation gap? When we see a generation gap, or when we say that there is a generation gap, it means that there is a lack of debate across various generations. There is very little intergenerational interaction and communication. And when this happens, we see very strained social relations. We see that in such a situation, the older generations tend to be authoritarian, and the younger ones, they tend to be rebellious. And then we see very little apathy across generations. And keep one more thing in mind. This generation gap is felt almost everywhere in our surrounding, whether it is our families, workplace, or other social places of human interaction and communication. Now, having or seriously considering the effects of generation gap, we naturally ask the question, where does it come from? Is it universal? Did it always exist across time? And is it universal or felt the same way across various societies? Where does it come from? The main question. Broadly speaking, I believe there are two reasons or two sources of generation gap. The first one is endogenous, the second one is exogenous. Endogenous or exogenous to individuals. When we talk of exogenous and endogenous factors, internal factors or causes of generation gap, by that I actually mean human biology. We human beings are biological species, we go through various biological phases throughout our lives. Now, when we say that, it means that at various biological phases, your body, your hormones, and the rest of biochemical reactions, they have deep imprints on our thoughts and our behavior. Let me borrow from psychoanalysis these two terms, though very cautiously, the id and the superego. When we speak of younger generation, biologically, they have stronger id. They have stronger instinctual tendencies. Or in other words, we can say that they tend to be hedonistic in their attitude and behavior, following the pleasure principle. Then we see that the younger generation is, given their rebelliousness, anti-status quo. They do not like, or they have a disdain for traditional authorities. They have a disdain for hierarchies. And more importantly, they are very much exposed to extreme ideologies, populist rhetorics, populist demagoguery. On the other hand, when we speak of the older generation, biologically speaking, I believe that their superego is very strong. They have a respect for traditions and authority. Our older generations, they tend to be, having a dislike for instinctual tendencies, for hedonistic lifestyle. Now, this really leads to a problem. I would say that in Asian terms, the older generation have their old broken tables, and the newer ones, they have their new half-written tables. Now, how to, bring them together in order to share their experiences and their aspirations and their values with one another, and to learn from one another. Coming back to that point, that our older generations, as I told you, they have a respect for authority, for traditions, and a disdain for this hedonistic lifestyle of the younger generation. And we see this gap grows day by day, which makes further complications among human, or when it comes to human relations. Now there is, another factor, which we call the exogenous factors. And in a word, if you ask me what is exogenous factors in this context, by that I mean the mode of existence of a person or a group of people. And what do I mean by the mode of existence? It includes almost everything surrounding us, which shapes our thinking and our actions, such as the socio-cultural milieu, the mode of production, technology, hegemonic ideas, hegemonic ideologies, or the spirit of the time, and several other things, including, the structures of market that shape our thoughts and actions and our behavior towards each other, our worldview. Now keep this in mind, that these various factors, the external factors shaping our thoughts and behavior, these factors actually interact with one another in a very complex intersectional manner. which means that no one or a single cause cannot be attributed to a complex phenomena like the one we talk about, generation gap. Your mode of production, your ideological and cultural milieu, technology, political structures, etc., they shape our mind and our behavior. And you cannot, attribute that to a single cause, as I told you. Actually, I don't believe in unilinear processes or single axis explanation. I do believe in complexities of things and the complexity of human life in itself. So these various factors, what I call the mode of existence, it shapes our thought, our actions. We human beings are actually historical beings. I don't believe in that either. Like, some people, the liberals would say they are liberal beings. Others would say, the Marxists would say they are labor beings. I do believe they are historical beings, which means that humans or human personality evolves over time because our context, our experiences, they evolve. Our mode of existence evolves constantly. And along with that, our thoughts, our actions, our behavioral patterns, they also evolve. This is why I usually say that human agency is contingent. It is deeply embedded in very complex structures. Now, keeping in view these internal and external factors, it looks like that generation gap is inevitable. Yeah, I also believe that there must be some gap between them. If it doesn't exist between or among generation, it means the society is static. It means it is not changing. And that would be, a death to humanity. But we also need to address some of the aspects of this phenomena in order to have very smooth interaction and communication and debate among various generations so that they can understand each other. Now, coming to this point, that what if generation gap really causes some social issues? It hinders normal, smooth interaction across various generation groups. Then we need to address it, and very consciously. First, we need to recognize it as a factor, and then we have to collectively find out some solutions to it. As I told you, technological advancement, innovation is inevitable. Changes in our value systems, in our political structures, in our social structures seem to be inevitable. I believe that, and keep one thing in mind, which is very important. The generation gap is not constant in the sense that it is the same across time and space. No, it varies across time and space. Say, for instance, in a pre-industrial world where there was either hunting and gathering society or, agrarian subsistence economies with very little advanced technology, we see very little change in our mode of existence, and hence there will be very little gap between the older and the newer generation. But in our age, where what we call, post-industrial age, I can see that this gap is increasing with every passing day, given the fast technological changes, globalization, and other means which have disrupted the traditional structures, family structures, social structures. In this age of internet and AI, where screen has become privatized, everyone has their own screen and their own, age group algorithm does some wonderful things. So I can see that the gap is increasing day by day. How can we address it? This is the final question, and I hope I will not take more than 2 minutes. So how can we address it? If it really is a problem, an issue. First thing, we need to promote a culture of debate, interaction, and communication across various generation groups. Now, there are various means of, promoting that culture. We can employ our sociological, ideological apparatuses of the society. And the older generations, I think they need to accept one fact, the inevitability of change, or rather I would say the necessity of change and technological innovations. We can't stop it. We can't stop it. So I would say that the older generation should also stop, shaping the younger generations in their own ideal images. There is a need to recognize the younger generation and their abilities, and keep this in mind that older generation tend to be nostalgic, and they are suspicious of the future, of what future holds for humanity. On the other hand, the younger generation, they live in the present moment, as I told you, following the principle of pleasure principle, hedonistic lifestyle. They tend to be whatever. Now coming back to this question, that how to address it. As I told you, that in the very first place, we need to promote a culture of debate, communication, interaction across various generational groups, as well as the older generations need to recognize the need for social change and innovation. But on the other hand, when it comes to the younger generation, I would like to quote from one of the movies, it's News of the World, in which Tom Hanks plays a lead role. It says, to move forward, one must remember. To move forward, one must remember for the younger generation. It means, there is a verse from Faiz Ahmad Faiz, हम पे गुजरी है जो गुजरी मगर शबे हिजरा हमारे अश्क तेरी आंखें बद समार चले. So ये जो changes हुई हैं, जो तरक्की हुई है, it's very much incremental, in which the older generations have contributed. Finally, in this context, it comes to my mind Nietzsche's The Spake Zarathustra, in which he writes an essay. It is on the old and new tables or something. And he says, although Nietzsche is very much for the new generation, and he has a disdain, a dislike for the older ones, for their, for their superstitious value system, Nietzsche was very critical of them. And he wanted to have his Superman created. But still he would say that man can be surpassed, but it cannot be overleapt. Thank you so much.